Welcome into the Tech Ed Podcast. I am your host, Matt Kirkner. We have a wonderful episode in store for you this week. Today's guest actually joined us about 3 years ago when we were just getting the podcast off the ground. So much has changed since then. We have listeners in well over 100 countries. We are streaming on 45 podcast platforms. And we are now ranked consistently in the top 200 of technology podcasts around the globe. So lots of great things happening for the Tech Ed Podcast. Lots of great things happening in our guest's organization as well. He is absolutely fascinated by artificial intelligence. He has spent so much time studying this topic, understanding AI, understanding its applications across the economy. We're going to have a lot of fun talking about this topic with Todd Wanek. Todd is the Chief Executive Officer of Ashley Furniture Industries, the largest furniture manufacturer on the planet. Todd, it's so great to welcome you back to the Tech Ed Podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Matt, and congratulations on being one of the top tech podcasts in the world. That's amazing. And you have so many people listening around the world, so congratulations on your success.
I appreciate that very much. None of it happens without incredible guests that bring a message to the world of technical education that is interesting and fascinating. And I know that this is going to absolutely check both of those boxes today as we talk today about artificial intelligence. I want to just start out, when we were talking maybe 3 years ago, we talked a lot about manufacturing, about education, about business analytics, and so on. Artificial intelligence has become such a strong focus for Ashley. We were together at a meeting. I think it was actually a school board meeting about 4 or 5 months ago, and you got up and delivered a presentation on AI. And it's clear that this is incredibly core to your business model and to the future of Ashley. So tell us a little bit about why this is so important and why you're building your AI strategy.
Well, I think that every organization, you've got to encourage renewal. As you look at an organization or a company like Ashley Furniture or any business, we live in a capitalistic world, and in a capitalistic world, you've got to fight to survive. You've got to earn your business and earn your growth. Therefore, you have to transform and rebirth organizations, and I think that's really, really important for every company. So as technology evolves and changes, you've got to look at how you can use it and implement it in the workforce and in your business model. And that's really what we're looking to do. We're looking to encourage our team to adopt these new tools because we believe it enables them to do a much better job, more efficient job, and not spend time on the tremendous amounts of data that we have available to us in manufacturing, in the offices, and retail, all the way through the supply chain. So, I think every organization must look at developing an AI strategy and look at how they can adopt this technology, because I just see it as an incredible enabler to every business. And we're on our 18th rebirth as an organization, which means we've rebirthed our company 18 times. And this time it's AI and robotics are the two big things that we're really focused on this latest rebirth. We're excited about the future, and I think every organization has to be open to what the world has to offer and determine how it could be used in their company.
I think a lot of folks, if they haven't had the opportunity to run a huge, iconic company like Ashley Furniture, as you've been able to do, Ashley Furniture Industries, they may not recognize that, you look from the outside and it's like, wow, you made it. You're a Fortune 500 company. You're on this Fortune list. You're on that Fortune list and so on. And it's really, you're getting up every single day and figuring out how to get better, how to maintain your market position, how to continue to stay ahead. And artificial intelligence is just one aspect of that, but a really, really important aspect. To your point, it's imperative for every company and every organization to understand how artificial intelligence is going to transform their market. We're going to talk a little bit later about what happens to companies that don't have that kind of strategy. But before we get to that, I'd love to hear, as you look at AI, as you look at machine learning, Todd, obviously a lot of different aspects to your business: retail, distribution, manufacturing, marketing, and the list goes on. Where do you see AI being most transformational in terms of the various sectors and the various divisions of your business?
AI is really an enabler, and there's parts of the business that I think are affected. I mean, overall, I think Copilot, we've taken Copilot within our organization. I think that Microsoft has done a tremendous job in that tool. So I think every person in our company to some degree is affected by AI at this point in time. So we've launched it throughout our organization, and we're very excited about it. And the capability it adds to be able to take notes from meetings, help you with writing emails, et cetera. And there's many, many more tools. I mean, developing PowerPoints, et cetera. It's really an amazing tool. So I would say AI kind of goes across the organization. It's an easy way to get people to start learning too. But the areas that are really impacted right now, our forecasting, product planning area, going through a complete AI revolution. They've done a lot of work on AI within that team because there's so much data and so much information that's used for forecasting. We've got 23,000 retail stores we do business with across 8 major DCs in the United States with tremendous ship-tos. So the amount of data that comes at us every single day in that area is very significant. But beyond that, creative services. I was with our head of creative services about a week and a half ago, and we were talking about AI. They use it for an application that would normally take them 3 months to do. It took them 3 days. They had a 3-month backlog of data as far as putting it into our website and our PIMS, product information management, and it allowed them to basically put all that information in effectively within a 3-day period of time, just save an amazing amount of effort. We use it for accounts payable. Our accounts payable department has really adapted and adopted it, and there's many more applications across the business. But this is just really the beginning. I mean, it's just going to go like wildfire throughout the organization. As it gets better, we get more capable of using it, and we just see it in areas where there's a tremendous amount of data, and in some cases, I'll call it data entry jobs. There's a lot of things that can be done to really automate and turn people into areas where they could spend more time on innovation versus just trying to do keystrokes and understand what data says.
Well, it's interesting as we think about, all the applications that you just discussed, starting out with Microsoft Copilot and using, some AI platform to assist with some of the more routine tasks that we do day in and day out, whether it's a PowerPoint, whether it's taking notes, whether it's writing an email. To your points, there was a study that was done by a couple students at MIT last year that I've just been fascinated by. They took 440 college educated professionals, divided them into 2 groups, gave one of those groups ChatGPT, gave the other one no assistance other than kind of the standard way of writing emails, of filling out grant applications, of doing some of the more mundane and administrative tasks. And what they found was just fascinating. The group that used ChatGPT, 37% decrease in the time it took to do routine administrative tasks was the first thing that it found. In many cases, the quality of the work improved, especially for individuals that maybe weren't as eloquent or weren't as polished in terms of being able to write an email, for instance. But the other thing that I found really interesting was that they found that for those individuals that were using an AI platform, in that case, ChatGPT, and you could certainly talk about Microsoft Copilot as well, their job satisfaction improved. They were actually more satisfied with the work they were doing because they were using AI to do some of the more mundane tasks that they would otherwise have to do on their own. And so I think it's really, really interesting when we start thinking about the future of the American workforce and the global workforce in this age of artificial intelligence. There's so many tools that are going to make us more efficient. You also talk about the huge amount of data that is coming at us on the manufacturing floor, in the distribution centers, from 23,000 different retail facilities and so on. Just tremendous amounts of data. Is there a specific use case or a specific example that you want to share? You shared a couple general ones, but something specifically where you're putting AI to work and it's showing some really, really interesting results?
I think that the biggest area for us is product forecasting. That's the area where I see a tremendous amount of opportunity because of all the data coming in. But we're just finding that when you're able to break this down, forecast down at the finite level, and be able to understand exactly what customer demand is in certain areas, you're able to learn so much more. The human being and the human brain can only absorb so much data, and the ability to be able to take that tool into our forecasting environment is tremendous. The data that's been shared with me is they're seeing a 20 to 30% improvement in their forecast accuracy. So when you start breaking that down into the amount of inventory you have to hold and customer satisfaction levels, it's significant. It's hundreds of millions of dollars of inventory that it takes out of the supply chain in a very short period of time. And we think that's probably going to be the most significant application we have in our business, is looking at the product forecasting tools, the ability to break data around, having the product in the right location at the right time. I would say that would be the one that I would probably be the most excited about because customer satisfaction is always important. Now, we could talk about chatbots and all those other things, but speed to market, reduction of inventory, reduction of waste within the supply chain, those are the areas that I get excited about personally.
I get excited with just hearing you talk about that. And you think about just kind of reflecting on that a little bit, you certainly have customer demand. You know what products your customers are going to be interested in purchasing at what period of time, at what time of the year. What are some of the trends that are taking place that might affect customer taste. You drive that back to what do I need to have available in my retail stores or in my ready to ship inventory, if you will. Drive that back into what do I need to manufacture. Now all of a sudden I can drive that back to what do I need to order from suppliers. How do I need to manufacture the product? How do I need to staff my facilities? All of these things. And then to kind of make that even more real, you start to think about, to your point, hundreds of millions of dollars of inventory that you're taking out of the supply chain. And especially now with interest rates being what they are, depending upon how you're financing that, whether you're using your own capital or you're borrowing it, there's an opportunity cost of using your own capital. There's a borrowing cost of borrowing to be able to build that inventory, and all of that turns into cash. And now we can reinvest that in the business, and we can compete on price when we have to. We can further improve our businesses when we don't. But really, it kind of speaks back to, and I'd be interested if you agree, this is really a situation where the companies that are doing what you're doing, Todd, are going to end up leapfrogging everybody else in the same way that Kaizen and continuous improvement and standardized quality and some of the movements of the last 30 years or so created huge competitive advantage. If you're not making these investments, if you're not figuring out how to your point, forecast future demand and manufacturing requirements, it really leaves you at a competitive disadvantage to the people that are doing that. Does that, it's kind of stating the obvious, but is that how you're looking at it?
Yeah, it is. And, my friend Peter Diamandis, he's the one that really turned me on to AI probably 6 or 7 years ago. I said, Todd, you need to be thinking about this and thinking about the applications it has in your business. He's got a saying, by 2030, there's going to be two types of companies, those that have AI and those that are out of business.
Right.
So I think that's very true. And you've got to be an early adopter of this. And it's not necessarily saying the tools are all easy to use at this point in time. It's the understanding of how to use them. Because every day I think there's a multitude of new applications that come out that you can use throughout your business. But yeah, it's definitely going to be a differentiator, Matt, a major differentiator as far as business is concerned.
Yeah, without question, and kind of to play off of that last comment on the various platforms that we have available to us, you've mentioned a couple already. As Ashley is going about figuring out how to implement AI, and you're way ahead of most of the companies I think that we interact with. Are you developing your own algorithms, your own platforms, or are you relying on existing AI platforms and using that to analyze your data, or how are you innovating in that space?
Yeah, it's really a combination of both. Number one, if you look at a typical process we went through even 10, 15 years ago, and in some cases today, everybody looked at just gutting their ERP systems and putting new ones in, right? And with AI, you don't have to do it anymore. You can put applications on top of a good database and be able to deliver results for the business. And that takes a lot of pain out, because the one thing I fear is having to rip out an ERP system and put a new one in, because my gosh, that's like brain surgery. And it's very difficult and complicated to do. These AI tools can just sit over the top of your existing databases, and you can pull information out and feed it to the users, and make sure that they're getting the data that they need to be able to do the job effectively. It's really business analytics or business intelligence on steroids, and that's a big way that we're using it at this point in time. But we're using Google, Gemini, or Bard, and our team wrote our forecasting tool in-house. So they've done the work themselves by using existing tools. And I think that's probably how most things are evolving within our business right now. If we're developing them in-house, it's either ChatGPT, Google Bard. Certainly there's other things available in the marketplace you can use. But overall, I would say it's a combination of buying applications that maybe take a lot of time to develop, as long as they're not super expensive, and then developing in-house and having the capability to develop in-house.
It's a saying that I use quite often, which is you don't have to know everything about something in order to be able to use it. And I think in a lot of cases, artificial intelligence and the platforms that are available to us are exactly like that. And yeah, in some cases, we're going to have data scientists, or we're going to have AI specialists that are developing their own algorithms, building their own models, building their own sets of data, and then analyzing that separate. But to your point, there's so many opportunities for us to use existing platforms and really accelerate the adoption of artificial intelligence. And layering some of these platforms on top of what we already have can be a phenomenal way to do it. One example that we've been pulling from a couple of the businesses that I'm involved in, less inventory management side and more on the sales and distribution side, But, we're now in a position where we can take a look at, what orders with a high probability of closure are going to close in the next 90 and 180 days. We know based upon who's making that prediction and their historical accuracy, whether they're maybe historically a little bit overly optimistic or pessimistic, so we can apply that data to it. We know supplier lead times, we know customer payment history, and we can build all of that into a relatively simple AI model, in this case using Microsoft Azure, that can help us predict cash flow for those businesses 14 months out. And then you start to think about, all right, if I know with a high degree of probability how much cash my companies are going to create and generate over the course of the next year plus, now I know how much risk I can take in the business. Now I understand that I can make investments and maybe take some risk in the business that I otherwise wouldn't have been able to. And so it's really transformed so many of the companies that I've been involved with as well. Not to the scale, I think, that of what you're doing with Ashley, but I certainly have a perspective and an understanding of what some of the huge benefits that come from the implementation of artificial intelligence. I'd be interested. I've spent a lot of time with your leadership team over the last several years, gotten to know a lot of folks in IT and manufacturing and automation and marketing and so on. Who's leading the AI effort? Is this something that comes out of IT, or is this something that you've got another team of people leading in your organization?
Yeah, well, number one, it's got to come from the top in this case. The leadership of every organization has to be interested in this technology and how it can be used. But we appointed a chief AI officer, and I think that's important that every organization has a chief AI officer, somebody that's responsible for educating the organization. So our chief AI officer has been with our company for some time, but he's super curious and always trying to learn and exposing himself to things. And he's doing a really good job. And I think getting that team motivated and inspired to take the next level and then go and interact with the business is what's needed. You've got to make sure the team is interacting with the business and educating, because education is the most significant thing that needs to be done today. Yeah, we can all use ChatGPT on our phones and ask it a question about things that you want to know. But the question is, what do you do with information once you get it, and how do you implement AI within your business? It's really the art of prompting at this point in time with ChatGPT, but it goes much farther than that. And you've got to have somebody that's able to take it and just really take it through the organization and help people define what their needs are.
Couple years ago, I read it was a report from the Department of Defense, or one of its related agencies, 672 pages on how AI was going to transform the world of defense. And one of the recommendations in that report was that every single agency within the federal government that had anything to do with national defense had to have a single individual in that organization who was responsible for understanding how AI was going to transform their market space or transform their business, and also responsible for coming up with use cases, applications, and strategies for how we're going to react and how we're going to build it into the model. And what I'm hearing from you is exactly the same thing. Number one is it has to come from the top. If the C-suite isn't completely committed to understanding AI and to making sure we're making resources available to take on the transformation, that's going to be a significant problem. And then in your case, having a chief AI officer whose responsibility it is to analyze everything from customers, markets, employees, business models, and so on, and then understand how AI is going to transform those areas, and get to work on the important aspect of adopting it across the enterprise. Then we start to think about, what you just touched on, which is you have to be in the business, you have to be involved with with the business to understand it. I think about the old go to the Gemba from our Kaizen days of actually, how do you transform your company? You go to the manufacturing floor, you go to the customer's facility, and really hands-on understand. And only then can we understand how we need to educate that next generation of our workforce, and the current generation for that matter, about how we're going to adopt a new technology, in this case, artificial intelligence. So you've been through all of these rebirths. That's one of the things I love about Ashley's business model, is that you really do rethink your entire organization every several years. And I think that's certainly one of your keys to incredible success over the time that Ashley's been in business. But as you're doing that, you constantly have to educate your workforce. And you touched on this already. You constantly have to be equipping individuals in every aspect of the organization with new skills, new understanding, new tools. How do you go about doing that? How do you prepare your leadership team, your manufacturing workforce, the folks in, maybe working in the office and so on, for the AI transformation that is to come?
You got to start with exposure. Number one, our chief AI officer has gone into the business, as you said, gone to the Gemba. And as he went to the Gemba, we've identified over 200 projects that we can use AI to use within the business. So in every department, that team goes in, they work with the leadership, They look at the data structure, they look at the whole system that's there, and they identify the opportunities. We've identified over 200. And then there's a multitude of ways that we've exposed our leaders. Number one, we brought about 500 of our top leaders in for a multi-day session, and we just went through, here's how you can use AI, here's a tool, here's the effectiveness that we see, and we just trained. We started with basic things, and now we're getting to more sophisticated and complicated things as time goes on. The other thing we did is, we're in early days, we're rolling this out, is a readiness matrix that we developed for every part of the organization. It's just early days. Several departments have already executed it, but just talking about organizational readiness to be able to take those tools on, a rating of 1 to 5 to say, okay, are you a 1, are you a 5? We got some departments, nobody's a 5 yet. We got some departments that are 3 to 4, so they're ready. Others are at 1. And we start with mindset, we start with organizational data structure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a complete list of questions that we ask. And that's a big deal to make sure that you understand what your organizational readiness is. And then beyond that, we've taken the lean tools that we've used for many years within our business, and we went through a value stream mapping process of these processes that we think that can be improved, that we've identified AI to go into those 200 projects. And we're doing value stream mapping to make sure we're taking the waste out. Because the one thing I can tell you about data, and you know this as well as I do, the only thing to do with a bad process and put AI on it is going to speed up chaos. And what you've got to do is, in my opinion, firstly, is go through and look at your processes, what the business has put in place, and through a value stream map process, identify how you can take that waste out of the organization and out of that process so you can automate it. Very much like we did over the years in manufacturing and other parts of the business that were responsible for lean manufacturing and lean offices. You've got to take those tools and be able to put them in place within your organization, teach the team how to do value stream mapping, and then eliminate the waste. Because I think if you don't start there, Matt, as step one, you're going to end up with a very, very bad outcome.
I think you make a really, really astute point there, Todd. And first of all, I love the idea of value stream mapping. And in all my years of running CI, continuous improvement and Kaizen events in manufacturing facilities, that's always where I started as well. Start with your current state. And if our audience isn't familiar with a value stream map, to simplify it a little bit, we're starting all the way back at the beginning of the process with an order from a customer or a forecast from a customer, and then mapping that process all the way through the order, through processing the order, through that order going to the manufacturing floor, through every process on the manufacturing floor, and then on to logistics, distribution, carrying inventory and so on, really mapping that order from start to finish all the way to that final end user, and then looking at every step of the way of where is our wait time, where are we spending money, where can we improve process, and really coming up with that 1 or 2 areas initially that say this is where we can get the most bang for our buck or the most leverage out of the investments we're making. And so what I'm hearing, and I just want to make sure I'm hearing this right, is as you're looking at the application and implementation of AI and machine learning and so on, you're really almost using it as a lean tool. Let's do a value stream map. Let's understand where we have a problem or an opportunity to improve. And then if AI, if data, if we can bring that to bear on improving that particular aspect of that process, that's where we're using it. Am I understanding that right? Let's come up with the use case and the problem first and then use AI to solve it rather than starting with AI and go looking for a problem?
That's exactly how you do it. I think that if you don't start there as an organization, and you and I have been in manufacturing for a lot of years, that's where I cut my teeth, that's where you cut your teeth. You know that a bad process makes for a bad product. And nobody wants a bad product. So obviously, you got to start with the process and just go back to it and say, what are we doing today? What do we want it to look like in the future? And then start working towards that future state and eliminating the waste throughout the operation. And I think if you start with that baseline and say that's job number one, is getting the organization ready for the technology to be put in place. It doesn't mean that you got to start and say, okay, let's use AI today. Start with organizational readiness and use those tools that we've learned over the years and start looking at your processes and say, I think these 20 processes can be automated. Start with lean tools and go to work.
And I love the focus as well on the organizational readiness and make sure that we understand is the culture, is the knowledge level or familiarization that our team members have with whatever it is that we're trying to do, is it where we need it to be in order to begin some type of an implementation of transformation or positive change, and really thinking about where we're ready and where we're not. Because if we try to implement this in a place we're not ready, we're going to spin our wheels, we're going to frustrate people. To your point, we're going to make a maybe underperforming process even worse as opposed to better. So let's make sure the organization is ready for it and move on from there. I want to talk a little bit about, what parts of the organization are most ready, what aspects of the process or of the entire enterprise are most ready or most ripe for disruption. You've talked quite a bit about the use of AI in a forecasting model and driving out waste out of the organization using it, but using it through forecasting and understanding, where inventory requirements and customer trends and retail requirements and so on are going. When I think of forecasting, Todd, I think of marketing, I think of accounting, I think of sales or business development in the business, and those are kind of where I point to when I'm starting to think about where are the trends and where's my forecasting going. Are those the areas that are most ripe for disruption, where AI is going to affect first, or are there other parts of the business that you think will come before that?
Man, I think anything that has heavy data use is prime. Where you have a lot of data, it could be the manufacturing floor with shop floor planning. It could be a lot of things like that will be impacted by it. But I don't see AI as a replacement to the work. I see AI as an enabler to do the work more effectively and efficiently. You mentioned that stat earlier, on worker delight and worker satisfaction. I think this is a kind of tool that we can use within a business to enable our people to be more productive and efficient. And rather than doing all the data crunching, that they're looking at the output and starting to identify, how can we optimize? How can we do a better job? And there's no question that AI will learn, AI will take on more things within our business as it continues to evolve. But at the end of the day, I think the enablement component is going to be massive for every business. I think creative services, like I said earlier, is one of the areas that's going to be disrupted in a way where you enable it. I think that forecasting is another one. I mean, you go right down the list. There's an amazing amount of things. WMS systems for warehousing, tons of data that you're trying to really calculate and understand. Where do I put a product? Where do I pick it from? All those pieces, where there's heavy integration of data, I think are going to be ripe. And I think they're very opportunistic for automation and AI.
I think about the automation transformation that I've watched Ashley go through over the course of the last 6 or 7 years. I think the first time I was on your shop floor in Arcadia, Wisconsin, maybe half a dozen robots, give or take. That was probably 6, 7 years ago. And I think the last time I was there, several hundred robots. And you see how automation has transformed the operations. And what we like to talk about when we talk about automation is we say, look, it's not replacing jobs. I mean, right now, the biggest challenge in manufacturing is finding enough skilled individuals to fill all the jobs that we have open. Certainly nobody is, in very few cases anyway, but almost nobody is losing their job to automation. But as you implement automation, a job gets safer, it gets more interesting, and it gets better paying. And certainly, why wouldn't you want a job that was safer, more interesting, and pays better? And it seems like you're saying the same thing about artificial intelligence. This isn't going to disrupt the workforce. It's not going to necessarily push workers out, but it is going to change the world of work. We're going to spend probably less time crunching data, building models, those kind of things, and more time figuring out, all right, now that we have this data, how do we use it to improve? Oh, now that we have this data, how do we use it to be even more creative in the business? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think that's correct. It's more optimization. The person should be more focused on optimization rather than just doing spreadsheets all day.
Right.
It's boring doing spreadsheets, no different than it is putting a staple in something, every day the same way. So I think that's ultimately what I see happening is we're going to be able to maximize the human potential. And, I'm excited about that by bringing data to their fingertips so they can make faster decisions and optimize a business and make more intelligent decisions, to be quite honest, because the data should be more easily available. So speed should speed up, in a business, and decision making should speed up. Therefore, it should be a lot more fun. And we should be able to optimize it and become more productive within our enterprises, which is what capitalism wants us to do. We're supposed to be more productive, right? That's what weeding out the weak is all about. So, we got to make sure that as an organization, we're constantly evolving, constantly rebirthing, constantly changing so we can become more productive as an organization.
It's what capitalism wants us to, and frankly, it's what it requires of us, right? Because the truth of the matter is that if we're not constantly optimizing and making jobs more interesting, making them more exciting, driving our organizations forward, driving out waste. The truth is that the folks that are doing those things are going to end up eating our lunch. So it certainly expects it of us. It requires it of us. When you think about the talent, and I know that you've got a tremendous commitment at Ashley toward lifelong learning and continuing to upskill your incumbent workforce. Tell us a little bit about talent as it relates to artificial intelligence. Are you having to go outside the organization to find these people? Are you growing it in-house? Is it a combination of both? And if you are going outside, where do you find people that have an aptitude or an understanding of how to implement and leverage AI?
Yeah, that's a great question. We believe in growing our own as much as we possibly can. So we've been able to find some really curious people within our company. We have a big business analytics department within our organization, and that team has always been really data driven. So they're embracing AI and what AI has to offer and large language models. So they're super interested in this stuff. So we've been able to take them, and they've transformed a big part of our company as far as AI and data. But also just finding other people that are curious within the company. They're all over the place, quite honestly, and they're really developing and evolving in this space. But beyond that, it's a new space. A lot of people are just learning how to do it and how to use these tools. Some people have experience over the last 5, 10 years, but it's a relatively new technology and new capability that's being used. So we're really on a global search. The United States is obviously an area where we're looking, but India, China, many other parts of the world, we're also looking for talent because we have operations in those areas. And we've been able to find talent in those areas as well as the United States. So it's a combination of both, and just really looking at how we grow our own, and then how do we put outside capability within our company so we can add more capacity and capability to our organization over time.
You mentioned that word curiosity, and I think that came up a couple of times as you were answering that last question. That's really interesting to me. It sounds like you're finding that maybe somebody doesn't necessarily need to be a master's degree, data scientist or a PhD in data science, or they don't have to be building necessarily these models themselves. Although I'm sure there's an aspect of it. Is that curiosity part of it? Finding people on your team that are like, "Hey, this is really fascinating to me. I want to learn more. I want to understand how this is going to affect my job, my department, my aspect of the business." Is that something you're actively seeking out? Are those curious people, and how do you find them? Would be another question.
100%. We're really pursuing those people. They're starting to use these tools and figure out how to enable. Doesn't mean that they're going to be a software engineer, but they're able to take these tools and speed up Excel, speed up other things that they're doing, and find ways to add, I call capability, add more capability to their team and their job, and really expand the productivity that they're able to achieve. So that's probably the most important way I see growing any business, is the fact that we do have time. This isn't going to change overnight, but the more exposure and capability we give to our team, and give them the tools to be able to use. It's an investment. If you're not approaching this as an investment and saying, I'm going to give them the tools so they can use it, because one thing I could tell you is we had to do this. You can't use this stuff in the public domain if you're going to be using confidential information within your company. So you got to take it behind your firewall, which we've done, and we provide these tools to our teams. And you always find people that are curious that are using it, these super users. They're looking at any tools that can add capability. They're curious. They're trying to figure out, how can I do my job better, easier, faster? Those are really exciting people to have around. And they always rise to the top. You're always able to see them because they have a twinkle in their eye. They're willing to try new things. They're faster. They're more efficient. And we've got a fair amount of them here, and I'm really excited about that, that they're using these tools. But make sure you provide the tools. Make sure the tools are secure and they're not out in the public domain just playing with data that is company data. Get it behind your firewall so you can control it, and then give everybody a chance to be able to play with and see who rises to the top and how they use it.
I agree 100%. I mean, you can tell people. You use the term twinkle in their eye. I love that. When somebody's a winner. When they're asking the right questions. When you're getting an email from them at 6:30, 7 o'clock at night because they got fascinated by something and they just couldn't wait till tomorrow morning to tell you at work. So I think that's a really great message too. As we have a lot of students, young people listening to this podcast, that importance of curiosity and that importance of being that person that asks the right questions, that shows an interest. And you're hearing the CEO of one of the largest companies in the United States saying that is what we're looking for. Those are the individuals that are going to move in our organization. So great advice for young people. I'd be interested also in your advice for companies that are starting their AI journey, Todd. I know you've been on this now for 5 or 6 years, maybe even more than that, as you're looking at new ways constantly to rebirth. Ashley, tell us a little bit about where you started.
Yeah, I mean, we just started by asking a lot of questions. We are an organization that believes in a rebirth in itself and finding, new ways to encourage renewal within our organization, everything that we do. To encourage any organization to adopt AI, the only thing I can tell you is you have to start by walking the journey. And you've got to study it, you've got to research it. There's so much information available. We exchange emails every once in a while about some new things that are happening. And there's just so much information that's available out there for you to be able to learn about these tools. There's podcasts, there's articles, there's white papers, there's videos, whatever you need, you can find it. You can call Microsoft and they'll come and give you a complete pitch on Copilot and why it's important. I think that the biggest thing I could do, to encourage somebody is say, just start. Don't think you'll have all the answers and don't think it's going to be perfect. Just start, be curious, adopt some tools, ask the questions, read, listen, whatever you have to do to be able to absorb this information, understand how it can be used in your company, you should do it because there is no guarantee. The only guarantee is that you're constantly finding ways to add more value to your customers. And that's really what we're after as an organization, which is how do we add more value? Because we know if we start with the customer first, know what the customer wants, which comes through forecasting, comes through intelligence you can get. Even the product design process for us is completely changing, because of all the information in the public domain through websites, through what Amazon's selling and others are selling. You're able to really understand, what's happening in the marketplace. And then you could take tools like Midjourney and you can develop products. That's a publicly available AI tool. We're actually developing products through Midjourney right now as an organization. So this whole process of just being curious, and I use curious an awful lot because I think that's one of the most significant attributes of success is curiosity, and just asking, how can I use it, where can I get information, and go. Don't sit here and try to make it perfect, just start.
The enemy of progress is perfection is another line that I like to use. If we try to come up with the perfect strategy on the front end, we're probably going to spin our wheels. We're never going to get started. So dive right in. First of all, I can tell you in response to that last comment about the emails that we exchange, I always know when I get an email with Todd Wanek's name in it that it's going to be some fascinating technology or some really, really cool link. So please keep those coming because you, in so many ways, keep me up to speed on changes that are taking place, not just in your markets, but across the entire economy. You mentioned Peter Diamandis earlier. You recently sent me a podcast that was all about humanoid robots and an individual that had started several companies in that space. And one of the pieces of advice as the two of them were talking was about this whole idea of the other thing that you just mentioned, which is don't be afraid to fail. You're going to fail, especially when we're in emerging technologies, especially when we're trying to find new ways to rapidly advance our organizations. There are going to be failures along the way. That is okay. You want to take calculated risk and you want to make sure that you're minimizing the chance of failure, but certainly failing along the way and continue to be curious. Really, really important. By the way, you sent me a bunch of links, a couple YouTube videos, podcast from Peter. We're going to link those up in the show notes. So for our audience, if you're interested in the kind of stuff that fascinates Todd Wanek, we'll put some of those links in the show notes so you can take a look at some of the things that he's thinking about in the world of humanoid robots in particular, which we're not really even getting into in much depth here in this conversation, but that'll be truly, truly transformational. Todd, as we're chatting here, you're talking about getting started in artificial intelligence, talking about starting your strategy. You made a couple comments that I just want to kind of connect the dots on. One of the things you said early was, look, the companies that, by 2030, if you don't have an AI strategy, I think in that case you were quoting Peter as well, you're either going to have an AI strategy or you're going to be out of business. So obviously things moving relatively quickly. That's only 6 years away. And on the other hand, you said in your last answer, we don't have to necessarily do this all overnight. It doesn't all have to happen now. So kind of juxtapose those two for me a little bit. I mean, as people are getting started on their AI journey, certainly there's a stick, which is we better get this figured out in the next 6 years because if our competitors do and we don't, we're going to be in trouble. On the other hand, we don't necessarily have to wake up in a panic. We can do some experimentation. So kind of connect those dots a little bit. How fast is this moving and how much time do businesses in certain markets have to figure this out?
Well, it's moving at light speed, as you know. It's moving incredibly fast. I just don't think that it's going to go from 0 to 10,000 miles an hour overnight. There's a lot of vaporware out there of how fast this is going to move. I think it's going to move fast, but I don't think it's going to be 6 months where it's over. I think this is a 3 to 5 year journey. But again, 3 to 5 years is fast. And if you don't start today and you don't start getting the organization prepared and ready, you're probably going to be vulnerable in the future of what's going to potentially happen. Because imagine this. Imagine if you're an organization like Ashley Furniture who's got 35,000 employees, which we value. They're tremendous people. But if somebody would come in and adopt technology and humanoid robots and we don't do it, and they can operate more efficiently than we can, let's say that our 35,000 employees are producing 1 million pieces of furniture a year, and somebody's able to take 35,000 employees and produce 3 million pieces of furniture a year, we're in trouble. And that's the way you should look at this technology as well as humanoid robotics, or even the current form of robotics, is the ability to be more productive and have a cost advantage compared to your competition is very significant. You've got to understand that and understand what that means. Now, is this going to impact every industry? Maybe not. I don't know how it's going to impact restaurants, for example. Is there a server or a cook? Over time, we'll see exactly how that evolves. I know when I go to a restaurant, I don't necessarily want to interact with technology. I want to interact with a person because that's kind of the experience I'm after. And that may change over time, but I don't think that's going to be impacted in the short term. When I look at manufacturing and supply chain and areas like that, I think that the ability to produce more with the same number of people is very, very significant. And that's the way we look at it. It's like, okay, we don't see it as being disruptive. We see it as being more disruptive to our workforce and the people we have. We see it as being more productive and allowing us to do more with what we have. And again, the goal isn't to have people where they tip over and they got more work to do, 3 times the work. The goal is to be in a position where we can provide data and capability to them so they can do it more effectively without wasting time on things that are maybe redundant. And that's where we see the biggest advantage. So as we go back to the original question, how fast is this going to change? I think in 3 to 5 years, it's significant. I think in 6 months, it's not as significant. But if you don't start preparing now and get your organization ready and start taking in the tools, paying for the tools, it's an investment. It is an investment in people, it's an investment in capability, it's an investment in technology. And those things need to be put in place for an organization to advance and to be able to really embrace this technology and adapt to what the marketplace is going to require.
As we're having this conversation, the advent of COVID doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was 4 years ago. That doesn't seem like a long period of time. So if we're talking about 3 to 5 years, yeah, we're not going to wake up in July of 2024 and all of a sudden our entire business model has been 100% disrupted by AI. But over the course of 3 to 5 years, or looking back from like the time COVID started here in the US to where we are now, it's going to move relatively quickly. And I think the advice for employers, whether it's manufacturing or businesses in other spaces, is you got to start going on your strategy. You got to start understanding how this is going to impact your business, and you've got to start getting ahead of it, or somebody in your space is going to. And I think it's true of both large businesses and small businesses. You mentioned the restaurant sector, and I had a really interesting podcast, or I think it was a video that I watched not too long ago. Andrew Ang, who's an adjunct professor at Stanford, he's done a bunch of AI startups, was speaking. And he said, you think about some of these use cases or applications. I mean, yes, they're going to affect, large Fortune 500 companies. The example he used was like the small pizza restaurant in a mid-sized town. And he said, you start thinking about all the data that person has about what pizzas get ordered with what ingredients, on what days, during what time of the year, all of this data that they have available to them if they gather it. And you can start to use that kind of data to project future requirements. And now you can use that to drive inventory out of the value stream. Maybe you buy certain sausages or sauces or so on, and others you don't have to have in inventory based upon what demand is going to look like. And his whole thesis was, look, we think about the impact on huge companies and it's going to be significant, but this is going to impact small companies as well, because if you're the pizza restaurant that figures out how to manage your inventory, drive cost out of your model, sell your pizza, at a lower price point, or reinvest that extra capital in your business that you can invest in growth, either way, that's going to be good for you. That's going to be good for your employees. That's going to be good for your business model. So really do think that it's going to it'll impact different industries at different points in time. But I think it's going to be truly transformative across the entire economy. You mentioned, Todd, when you're sourcing talent, you talked about China, you talked about India, you talked certainly here about the United States. You do business all over the globe. Got a global footprint as a manufacturer and as a retailer. Tell us a little bit about what regions of the globe are leading on artificial intelligence. Is the U.S. ahead? Are we behind? And how do you see us stacking up against some of the other regions in which you're doing business?
I would say that the U.S. is currently ahead in AI. The problem is we're just not putting enough people through our school systems that understand how to use AI, the software engineer, so to speak, or the curious person. I see India as making a massive investment in this area, and China. They're both really evolving in this space fast. India is really focused on what their number one capability is, which is their people. And they've really put themselves in a position to control a lot of the technology and software engineering and back office functions as a country. And I see them really evolving quickly. So we've got AI engineers that we've hired in India. We've also got a lot of AI engineers in the United States that I'd call, homegrown engineers, as well as some that we've hired. So, overall, I would say that India is probably catching up incredibly fast. China is also catching up incredibly fast. So the U.S. today, I would say, has a little bit of an advantage, but not much. And it's changing quickly. A lot of the capability and technology that we know in our country is certainly leading. What Microsoft has done and what Google have done, and certainly what Apple's probably going to end up doing, and others. There's a lot of capability that's been put in place and it's been developed here, but it's also widely available to other countries. So it's continuing to get reiterated and improved over time by these other countries, and we're going to see them evolve fairly quickly in this space.
All the more reason to not stand still, to continue to innovate, to continue fostering innovation here in the United States of America, and to make sure we're preparing that next generation of the workforce as well. You touched on that, and in the idea that we're not necessarily producing enough software engineers. I would add to that data scientists, business analytics folks, experts in deep learning and artificial intelligence and so on. So many opportunities for us to produce more talent. Your company, your family, your foundation has made at the kind of the core of so much of its philanthropy, supporting technical education, supporting STEM education. There again, we could do an entire episode just on the incredible investments that you've made in school districts and technical colleges and universities. So you interact with educators quite frequently, and I know you do, and a lot of times we do that together. If you had some advice for educators in terms of preparing that next generation of the workforce, what would you tell them?
Well, we've got a great example in Whitehall, Wisconsin, of Mike Begley, who's really trying to understand how AI can impact education, and he's pulling together a group of other schools and trying to really develop a plan of how to use AI. And he sees it as supplemental, which I agree with him 100%. It's supplemental education that you can provide, but I think that the exposure is the most important thing. And I've got to commend Mike for taking this. You and I were together at that meeting in Whitehall, Wisconsin, that you referred to earlier, and we talked to Mike, and I made a presentation on AI and the impact, and he's just been curious, and he's really gone after it, and he's got tools he's looking at and how he can execute it in the classroom. So I'm incredibly proud of the work he's doing. But I think the biggest thing is how do you use it? How do you expose these kids and how to use it? How to use that capability? I grew up in the 70s and 80s. This is my 60th year. So I've been around the block a little bit. But back then, we're just getting exposed to computers. What a computer was. I mean, when I grew up, there wasn't computers in my early years. And as I went into high school and college, the computers were widely available and becoming more widely available over time. Well, the same thing's true with this technology. It's got to be adopted by the schools and rolled out to the children. Now, they'll use it because they're curious and they understand technology better than you and I. But, at the end of the day, they've got to take these tools and figure out how to use it in their classroom. I always talk about variation in education. You get different types of teachers across school systems, some that are great, some that maybe aren't so great. Now, how can you reduce the variation? You could do it through the common use of tools like this, like AI, for example. Imagine if you could have Einstein teaching every child, what impact it would have on the educational system and limiting variation. And I think you've got a platform here that can be used that way. And I think that you can use this capability and technology. And I'm not saying that the teacher goes away. I'm saying this becomes supplemental for the teacher to develop their curriculum, to be able to educate and reach out to the kids in ways that they want to be reached out to. And I think these tools can be amazing for children to get exposed to at a very early age.
You touched on two things that are really, really fascinating to me, Todd. And the first one is, how do we inspire that next generation? How do we bring the technology to the classroom? How do we allow them to use AI platforms to perform analysis, to do predictive analytics, and so on, and building that into the curriculum? And also the flip side of it, which is, how is artificial intelligence going to transform the way that we educate young people and people of all ages? And I think there's just no question that in terms of things like personalized learning plans, understanding the ways that people learn, the way that we can drive waste out of the learning process. You talk about reducing variation in delivery. All of a sudden, my brain goes to Six Sigma and all those years in manufacturing. So really, really interesting stuff. I'm really glad that you mentioned Mike Bigley at the Whitehall School District and the work that he's doing with several other districts. I'm a huge fan of Mike. He is a genuine education disruptor, as I like to call him. I've actually spoken to his AI group on several occasions to kind of share ideas and learn from them. Just always such a pleasure, Todd, to spend time with you. We're kind of nearing the end of our time here. I could go on for hours about this topic. I know that you could too, but you have to get on to figuring out how you're going to continue to use AI to rebirth Ashley. And so we'll make sure we're respectful of your time. I do want to finish with one question. And it's a question actually that we started asking about midway through our first year here on the Tech Ed podcast. And since your last time on the podcast was early on in that first year, we didn't get a chance to ask it of you that time. And I'd be really interested in listening to your response this time. If you could go back in time to talk to that 15-year-old Todd Wanek, maybe you're a sophomore in high school, as you suggested, growing up in the 70s and 80s. But if you could go back to that point in time and give that young man one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
That's a tough question, Matt. I've thought about that a little bit. I grew up with great parents. I was very fortunate. You know, my dad, my
I
mom
do. And your mom, you bet.
is great as well. They really encouraged me to be fearless and, take things on and not back down from any single challenge. And I would say that's the one attribute that I'm very proud of. But, I wouldn't have anything in my life that I'd change. I think if I could talk to myself, I'd say I should have invested in the early years in Microsoft, Apple, Google.
Yeah, you'd be so much further ahead, right?
Maybe that's one mistake I made. But instead, I invested my time and energy and love into Ashley Furniture, and I'm very proud of that. But I think being fearless and being courageous are really important things, and then being curious. And those values were instilled in me early on in life.
That's a beautiful combination. And really what we've talked about here was, bringing it back to artificial intelligence, Todd, being curious. And that came up throughout the entire conversation, and also being fearless and courageous and saying, let's dive in, let's figure it out. Let's not be afraid to fail a couple times. We can always bounce back. We can always sort this out. And really it's, I always like to say it's the people that stood up one more time than they fell down and actually had the guts to go out and do it that end up driving change and being incredibly successful and accomplishing their personal mission, which I know you do every day through your work at Ashley Furniture. So you're a great friend. You're a fascinating guest. Really appreciate you taking some time for us here on the Tech Ed podcast. It's been a phenomenal conversation.
Well, thank you, Matt. It was awesome. Appreciate it.
We will take Todd Wanek every time we can get him on the Tech Ed podcast. What a great conversation we had about Ashley Furniture, how they're using artificial intelligence in their business, how they rebirth their company regularly. I always learn so much when I'm around Todd. So thankful to him for joining us on this episode of the Tech Ed podcast. We talked about all kinds of things. We talked about other podcasts. We talked about links that we can share with you about some of the things that are inspiring Todd and inspiring artificial intelligence learning at Ashley Furniture. So be sure and check out the show notes. We have the best ones in the business. Head on over to techedpodcast.com/Wanek. That's techedpodcast.com/WANEK. All kinds of helpful links, all kinds of helpful information will be waiting for you there when you check out our show notes. Don't forget, we are active all over social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, posting regularly about episodes, about featured insights, and amazing content. So find us on your favorite social platform. And when you get there, say hello. As always, we would love to connect. Until next week on the Tech Ed podcast, thank you so much for being with us.